Hey team, today we're going to learn how acquisition entrepreneurship actually aligns with Robert Kiyosaki's CashFlow Quadrant. My name is Walker Dybel. I spent the second half of my career acquiring $16.5 million in revenue across 10 companies, and I am the best-selling author of Buy Then Build and the creator of the Acquisition Lab. So a recent member of our community was talking about how he applied for the Acquisition Lab because he had recently read Robert Kiyosaki's CashFlow Quadrant, which is the sequel to the national bestseller Rich Dad Poor Dad, which is the best-selling personal finance book of all time. And in the CashFlow Quadrant, what he talks about are this is the CashFlow Quadrant. What he talks about are the 4 ways that people can make money. Okay. And the first is being an employee, okay? And this means that you are forever working for somebody else. And S is self-employed, meaning you're probably a service professional, a doctor, a lawyer, a business broker, someone who sort of works for themselves. They are the system, and they're out there sort of, they have their own business, but they're the ones executing daily on the delivery, attraction, conversion of customers. Then you've got building businesses, okay? Building businesses, this is what he calls the right side of the quadrant, is something that is an asset that then generates revenue for the individual rather than the left side of the quadrant where you're working for money, okay? And then of course you've got, well, he's an investor, so we can all apply this as sort of like the ultimate quadrant, right? But this is investor where you reach financial freedom because your assets, your personally owned assets, generate enough income for you passively so that you don't need to actually work anymore, okay? Now, this is what he then goes into 3 different ways that personal income statements and balance sheets look like, okay? And we'll say that, this is the first, the second, and the third, okay? So the first is you've got income and expenses. So this is the income statement, your personal income statement. Okay, and then you've got your assets and liabilities, so your personal balance sheet, okay? So what he's talking about is people go to work and they make income, and the poorest people will actually then, the cash will come in, okay, then it'll go through their personal expenses and then out. That's it. They never really generate any assets, and if they're really poor, they really don't generate any massive liabilities, okay, other than potentially a small mortgage. And the middle class, okay, people come in and work for money, all right, and then what happens is they have to first pay off their liabilities, okay? So this is going to be a car, this is going to be your mortgage, this is going to be the other things that Robert talks about that sort of trap us in this sort of system here on the left side, okay? Then whatever's left, you come up and pay your expenses and out, okay? The big takeaway is you're never really building any big assets that you own, okay? The personal financial statements of the rich, he describes as a bunch of assets that then generate income, okay? So Rich Dad, Poor Dad, CashFlow Quadrant, this is the goal, okay? Make assets that generate income. Now, when it comes to acquisition entrepreneurship, we're using debt to buy these companies, okay? By and large. And even if you can pay for it in cash, your ROI is still going to be tremendously better. So the thing is that I put this one in a black box over here because this is actually the business, all right? So when you buy this company, okay, this company becomes a black box on your personal balance sheet, okay? So we'll say that this big black box of the business becomes that, okay? Then, when you acquire the business with debt, that debt comes here on the liabilities of the business, okay? Then as your business generates income or revenue, okay, it pays off all the expenses, it pays off all the liabilities, it increases the net worth of the business over time with the equity buildup and the fact that you're growing it. And it also, this whole asset generates money to you personally, okay? So, having never applied Acquisition Entrepreneurship or the lessons in Buy Then Build to Rich Dad Poor Dad, I had a fun weekend thinking through this. So the point is that coming back up to the cash flow quadrant, okay, Robert always tells us you want to try to get out of the rat race and onto what he calls the fast track, okay? And he says always be anchored in two of these sort of quadrants. Obviously, he pushes for investor for good reason, and so if you're an employee, make sure you're also an investor. If you're self-employed, he actually mentions you should learn to start businesses. Start or buy businesses is if you read carefully, that's what he says in here, and then ultimately becoming an investor. So he says the ultimate combo of the rich is going to be on the right side of the of this matrix here. So this I would be building passive income, B would be building businesses. I want to make a clear point though. A lot of this debt, okay, when you're starting out and even mid-career, when you're acquiring businesses, a lot of this debt needs to be personally guaranteed. It just does, okay? There's ways to get around it, but trying to, explain to, let's just say 95% of people that are going out to buy a company are just not going to get around it, okay? And that's just not how banking works. And so the thing is that I never say buy a company and go hire someone you don't know, okay, to run it, and then you move on and buy other companies, okay? Take your time. Build safety, okay? Work in the business for a while. However, as you work in the business for a while, make sure you're building systems to ultimately get yourself out of it, okay? And as you no longer work in it, you're also making your business transferable so that one day you can sell it. And the ability to be able to sell it is actually what ends up making it an asset, okay? Otherwise, it's just a cash flowing item, which is like a high risk investment, okay? So basically, this is the cash flow quadrant, and this is how acquisition entrepreneurship fits into it. Thank you.